Welcome to Conversations with the Pastor, the hippest show in the Pacific Northwest, where we talk about current events and things that matter to you. We're here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Now listen, this is an interactive conversation. That means we need you to ask questions via Facebook or pastorconversations at the NBCF.org. Don't miss out. Now let's start the conversation. Pastor?
Good evening, and welcome to another edition of Conversations with the Pastor. Yes, it is a conversation, which means you got to talk back to me. You got to let your fingers do the talking on your keyboard and send in your questions. So this is like a game of double dutch. The ropes are turning in the conversation, and you feel the rhythm, and get in where you fit in, where you're interest, your curiosity is piqued, where something was said that you didn't quite hear it all, want clarification, or you want to know more of. So talk back to you, holler at your boy tonight so that we can have a conversation, because hopefully these issues resonate with you in your life, because we're trying to drive down your street. Tonight, before I introduce my illustrious guests, I want to join the rest of the nation in sending up thoughts and prayers. I hate to use that language because it's so overused by our political types as a way of diverting from real attention and action. But from a standpoint of people of faith who realize that prayer does change things, and we often mediate on behalf of others because we realize the God we serve is everywhere. And I know the God I serve is in the state of Florida. And I have a lot of blood family members and lots of friends, a number that I cannot number, and colleagues and people I don't know, but they're still God's children. And so my heart goes out to people who have had to evacuate. It goes out to people who are hunkering in place. It goes out to emergency workers who are called and paid and ready to run into the storms that people are running away from, and will certainly put their lives at risk. A part of the country that has not yet recovered from Helena, and now Milton is bearing down on them. It's making landfall now. The worst is yet to come, and the piles of debris from 10 days ago will soon become projectiles and missiles. My heart and prayers for all of the people in harm's way, hearts and prayers and tax dollars and support from everything from National Guard to volunteer groups, church groups, congressional action that's going to be needed to rebuild communities from the ground up, from infrastructure, sewer systems, power lines, hospitals, schools, churches, housing, places of employment. We oftentimes give a few days of our attention to any subject, and then the media moves on to the next spectacle or scandal. But these communities that weren't built in a day, weren't built in a year, weren't built in a decade, will not be rebuilt in a day, will not be rebuilt in a week, will not be rebuilt in a month, will not be rebuilt as they were in a year. Some people will never come back because they will have nothing to come back to. Some communities will never, ever be the same. The landscape of Florida is about to be changed. One of the real storms that I'm hoping will pass over soon is the storm of climate denial. People who still want to suggest that there is no human influence on climate change, that there is no climate change, and to the degree that there is, that it has nothing to do with humanity's activities, and therefore rationalizing, justifying, and prevaricating on the issue of how we power our lifestyles. Do we continue to move with urgency and diligence and discipline toward clean and renewable sources of energy, or do we double down on fossil fuels? Some have cast their lot with the fossil fuel industry, continuing to blast the ozone layer, continue to heat up Earth, continue to melt the polar ice cap, continue to rise sea levels, continue to send us more and more killer storms, 1,000-year storms. We're getting them, a couple of them a year. One more foot of water in Miami is underground. We, through our behavior, humanity, we have not been good stewards of the earth. And these environmental chickens have come home to roost. So while we're digging out from this, hunkering down, soon to dig out, spending the billions of dollars on rebuilding, and we keep doing it over and over and over again. Someone once said that the definition of insanity is to do the same thing and expect a different result. Eventually, we have to stop treating symptoms and budgeting for symptoms and have to get at the cause. The one thing we saw during the COVID pandemic is once we were all locked in and we were working from home and only essential workers were venturing out trying to protect ourselves from an invisible killer, that from the space stations and outer space above the earth, they noticed how short a period of time for the air quality to clear out once we started driving. It gave us hope that if humanity could actually pivot, if we could actually repent, which is what that word means, turn and go in a different direction, how quickly the earth can recover if we could just change. And so while we send up thoughts and prayers, when the prayer meeting is over and the storm has passed, then the halls of Congress and in our state legislative bodies and all places where policy, our collective enterprises are planned and funded, we might choose to change the direction. And I do believe that the air will clear out, that the earth will calm down, that the seas will settle down, that the coral reef will rebirth sooner rather than later, if the steward of God's garden would actually steward God's garden. But for now, we do pray. With that, I want to introduce somebody I have been wanted for years to bring here on Conversations with the Pastor. I've watched her from afar. I am one of the, not a crazy fans, but fans of celebrating any and everybody out there who's doing the real work, not talking the talk, but walking the walk. She is one of the movers and shakers in our community, the president and executive director of the, give me it again.
El Centro.
El Centro de la Raza.
Very good.
Center.
And it translates into the Center for People of All Races.
The Center of People of All Races, what we call Rainbow Coalition. Estela Ortega. Yes, did I get it all right?
You said it perfect.
I'm trying to get my Spanish on tonight. Welcome to Conversations with the Pastor. Estela, how are you tonight?
I am very good, Reverend Braxton, and it is such an honor to be with you and to be a part of this discussion with you one-on-one in this way. And you always hold a special place in my heart, because when my beloved Roberto Maestas passed away, you were at, his memorial, and you gave words that were profound for him. So you're always here,
I was going to ask you, so I might as well do it now as an aside, because Roberto Maestas, he was so good to me as a 38-year-old pastor coming to Mount Zion, and he reached out to me. We went to lunch. And he was one of the few people who would curse in my presence and wouldn't stop to apologize. He just kept it moving. And he would also smoke blunt in front of me as well. So, but I loved that man. He was an icon. Just the mention of his name made rooms give that E.F. Hutton quiet. What was it like working with Roberto and being mentored by him?
Yes, absolutely. And I I was a part of the occupation of El Centro. I had met Roberto early in September in El Paso, Texas, at a call for Chicanos from all over the country to come to this conference to talk about creating an alternative political party for the Chicano community, because the Democratic and the Republican Party were not responding to our needs. And so there was a call, and that's where I met Roberto, and I was living in Houston, and he was living in Seattle, and so we kept in touch, and he let me know that an occupation had happened and sent an article that said, Chicanos occupy Old Beacon Hill School. So I said, why not? I'll come and visit. And of course, I met people like Larry Gossett, Bob Santos, Bernie Whitebear, Eddie Rye, and folks like, why don't you come back? Come back and be a part of this. And of course, when you're young, I was like 22 years old. Like, why not? I didn't have any reasons to stay put in one place. And so I came and visited, and the rest is history, and I came back. And Roberto and I got married in December of that same year. We had only known each other for 3 months, and we got married. And of course, we stayed married until obviously the day that he, passed away.
Love at first sight.
It was, I think, love at first sight. And I was involved also in community politics in Houston, doing voter registration, going into the barrios, knocking on doors to register people to vote, working with young people, protesting the war in Vietnam, marching, and also on farm worker issues. So I came, with a political consciousness, if you will. And, and as a young person, you spend hours, at coffee shops, talking about what a better world we can have. We just have the will, to do it and make it happen. So when I came and visited El Centro de la Raza, it's like, oh my God, there's people of all races coming together to do something good for the community. And, the only reason that El Centro de la Raza is still here today, and we never forget that. And that was the support that we had from the African American community, the Native American, Asian, and obviously Latinos, because at that time in Seattle, there was only about 25,000 Chicano, Mexicano, Latinos in King County with no political clout. And our clout came from communities of color, the faith community, and also the Vietnam War activist. And that building got turned over to us because of those sectors of people that supported that the Chicano, the Mexicanos should have a place that they could call their own, and keeping in mind that anybody who walked in through our door would be able to receive services, have a place for meetings, because there was all sorts of meetings from coalitions of all types in terms of coming together. And that's why we have a strong multiracial message and the work that we do on a daily basis, that it's not just for Chicanos, it's not just for Mexicanos, it is for all people of color and all people of walks of life. Come and seek services from us, and our staff is multiracial also, but we never forget that commitment, because we would not be here today for that. And so as far as working with Roberto, we didn't get along at the start. We there was no, I want to do it this way, you want to do it that way. But we eventually learned to work together and keep, the political differences or the ideas in the work, and not take it home with us. And so,
like James Carville and his wife.
Yeah, and so there was a strong relationship. So I understood when he had to be at meetings, when he had to travel.
Yeah.
When my little baby girl was only 6 months old, and he took a trip to Cuba for 6 weeks to help build homes in Cuba. I understood all of that, and so there was no tension around that, because we had the same mission and the same ideas in terms of creating a better world for people.
Let me ask this, because you something kind of may seem ticky-tack to some people, but oftentimes when I'm speaking to people outside of the African-American community and we're talking about African-American community issues, they say, what do you want to be called? Do you want to be called black? Do you want to be called African-American? And, you know, we've been called a lot of things over the years: Negro, colored, black, Afro-American, African-American. And Tiger Woods came up with his own multisyllabic term, whatever that was. So, you know, I know Chicano was a Mexican-born person who was here. So the second generation isn't Chicano. So is it Latinx? Is it Hispanic? Is it Latino? Is it Chicano? What is the language around just identity within the Latino, Hispanic, Latinx, Chicano community now? What's the proper way to refer to your communities?
Yeah. Well, you know, we number 62 million in this country.
That's 1 out of 5.
Yeah. And so there for a period of time up until about the 70s, it was Mexicans who were here. But then you started seeing the wars that were happening in South America and then Central America. So, and Puerto Ricans were here also. Chicano and Puerto Ricans were here up until the 70s. And then because of those wars of liberation and so forth.
Do Puerto Ricans and Latinos from Mexico see themselves as the same people?
We identify with who we are. Like, for instance, I refer to myself as a Chicana, but globally I know that in terms is that I am a Latina, you know, and so.
Which means?
All of our people who are Spanish speaking. You know,
okay.
Spanish-speaking people, basically.
Isn't that what Hispanic means, Spanish-speaking people?
It is, but Hispanic, basically what it emphasizes more is the European part of who you are. Oh. And not so much that, I mean, a lot of people, when you think about Latinos, you don't really know what that means. And so Latinos are indigenous. Latinos are
so it's more land-based, more land-based.
No, Latinos are Afro-Latinos.
Okay.
And we are European also. So we are a mixture of all of those people. And I know that we at El Centro are trying to promote that so people know who Latinos are, okay. You know, sort of thing. And so I refer to myself as a Chicana. And I'll say in a room, you know, my name is Estela Ortega, and I'm Chicana from the great state of Texas, you know, something along those lines. But so my point about that in the 70s, you started seeing people come from, you know, at first it was Argentina because there was a war there, people from Central America, different parts of South America, depending on what was happening in those countries. And so more and more people have arrived to the United States, and so they don't fit the category of a Chicano, and that's where Hispanic comes in. But Hispanic was given to us by the government. It's not something that we called ourselves. But today, you know, here we are in 2024, people do still refer to themselves as Chicanos, Mexicanos, Latinos, Latinx, and so, you know, it boils down to whatever is in how you see yourselves. I know that when we wrote the book about the history of El Centro de la Raza, we use some of those terms interchangeably to basically relate to who may see themselves as a Hispanic. They see that word in the book. The same thing as a Latino, Latina, they see that term. So basically using the terms of what's going to create unity amongst people.
So y'all like us, you might get called a lot of different things. As long as it's stated respectfully.
Yeah.
So tell me now, you alluded to it earlier, that there's been a long, rich, cooperative history between the Latina community and the African American community in the Pacific Northwest, in the Seattle area, even in the formation and the growth of the center. Talk a little bit more about that and who were the major players that cultivated that relationship?
You know, the relationship basically came out of, you know, the struggles in respective communities about, I mean, you know, basically it started identifying with, Dr. King. And there was a lot of work that was happening in all the communities. People were struggling for their liberation, their identity, respect, but we didn't know about it. We didn't know about what we were each doing. And so, and it started at, obviously also at the University of Washington, where students were coming from the Yakima Valley, Chicano students. There was some African-American students, Asian, and those students came together, basically, even though there was stuff still happening in the community amongst those different communities.
So Eddie Rye, Larry Gossett, and Roberto and those guys first were students.
And then, like, for instance, Bob Santos he was some church, I think it was called St. Cleaver or something along the lines, where he had open space for people to have meetings. So people would go there and have meetings. And that's how they, basically got to know each other. And for El Centro with Roberto and Larry Gossett, we were called CAPS, Community Action Agencies, and kind of just working together, and those relations created. Back in, I think it was 1968 or 69, Roberto was a school teacher at Franklin High School. Okay. And
what did he teach?
He taught Spanish and I think journalism also.
Oh.
And the students walked out of the school because the principal sent home 2 young Black girls because they were wearing their hair in a fro. They were wearing it natural. And the principal said, you go home and come back ladylike, which means,
What year was that?
That was like 1968 or 69.
In 68 or 69?
Yes, absolutely.
Because they'd been wearing afros for a while in that year.
Yeah, so the students walked out, and all the teachers left, and who stayed was Roberto. Roberto stayed. And so when Larry and his team of guys showed up, like, who's that white man over there? Because Roberto was a little light-skinned. I said, no, he's cool. That's Mr. Maestas, kind of thing. And that's where Larry and Roberto met, and sort of the relationships developed. But people, got together on issues supporting each other. We knew, and I think we all know that when you come together with other people, more people, you're stronger. Instead of fighting for, little bits of monies, you can do a whole lot more. And so those relationships were political, but then they developed into long time, friendships. Like, for instance, Roberto was Larry's best man at his wedding. And he had his wedding reception at El Centro de la Raza, so just those long and just working together. And I think when you're struggling for justice and it's hard, you've got to find happiness, in what you're doing, and joking around to sort of ease those tensions. And so, Larry, Roberto, Bob, who am I forgetting? Bernie, Eddie too. When I see Eddie, I always remind him about how every morning he had a radio show in the 70s. And he would play the Cisco Kid for Roberto. And I don't know what the significance of it. I don't remember the words, but that was always so cool, And he'd talk a little bit about the occupation. And here's the song, Cisco Kid, for my friend Roberto Maestas. Yeah.
So when after Roberto passed, you became the head of the center, correct? Before. Or were you already before?
Before, because Roberto knew that he had gotten, that
he was sick,
that he was very sick. And so I got promoted by our board of directors to be the executive director.
So you're carrying on that legacy. I'm not going to say his legacy because it was both of your legacy. It was the community's legacy. Tell us what is the essential work of the community, and then what it has been, but what has evolved to now in 2024, post-pandemic?
Yes. Well, a community-based organization with its intention to provide services to the community to ease the pain and suffering of our people, to help them get stabilized. And so, the basics of emergency housing, food, case management services for seniors. And it was hard. I mean, in terms of the first 7 years of El Centro de la Raza, people didn't get paid. I mean, we had many volunteers, so we always say that we were a volunteer-run organization. And I think that the powers that be saw that we were not going anywhere, and we were a little bit more diplomatic in terms of how we dealt with the powers that be. And so we slowly began to get funding, not a lot, you know, we're always an extremely poor organization. And working with young people, early childhood development. I mean, like today, our early childhood development staff do an amazing job in how they take care of our children, the languages they teach kids, the philosophy in terms of being in community. But starting in January, we're going to have on a daily basis over 500 kids under our care. That's how we've grown, you know, over these 52 years. And so things began to turn around when transit was going to come to Seattle. And I remember talking to staff and telling them, I said, we've got to get ourselves organized. We got to make sure that our fiscal policies, our employment policies, everything is in order and that we're delivering, because our time is going to come. Because I had seen the demographics that we were going to grow, and there's just, you have to respond to people's needs when you're growing. They're going to have needs. And our time came when Seattle decided to have a light rail station across the street from us, because there wasn't going to be one. It was just going to pass underground. So things began to change. You know, we involved the community in what should we have on the property. People definitely were interested in small business development, housing, you know, some retail space. Whatever we did in terms of commercial space, people wanted it to be local. And a lot of engagement with the community, because before we were always fighting with the neighborhood because it was becoming gentrified. And people really didn't want us to be there because we weren't, you know, we were an organization that was poor. You saw a lot of Mexicans and people of color coming and going, and it was gentrified, and people didn't really appreciate that. At one time they tried to buy the building from us, you know, sort of secretly, if you will. And of course we fought back and, you know, bought it ourselves. Our philosophy before we bought the building in 1997 was that no one entity should own the land, because it belongs to all of us, and sort of following indigenous philosophy about land. But when the gentrifiers wanted to take the building away from us, we said, now's the time to purchase it, so it'll be for the good of everyone. So things turned around in the Roberto Maesta's Plaza development. That was a $45 million development in 2016. That was a big development for us, because we only had an operating budget of like a little over $3 million a year. Hardly any money, but you know, we had done a lot of good work, created relationships with people, never really asked people for money. We just got what we got from the city. We didn't even know that that's what we should be doing, to tell you the truth, you know, kind of thing. And when we asked for community support to build what we were going to build there, and the retail, the offices, the child development, people supported us. And you know, we had clean books and all of that. So there was a lot of support. And when you do good work, other good things begin to happen. And so Plaza Maestas is considered a model project, won many awards, and it's still a model project. And one of the things that was important for us is that right after we built it, we had communities of color coming out of our ears, like, how did you do this? I mean, in their mind, if El Centro did it, we can do it too.
Yes.
And
you became the model, the template.
So of course we wanted to help people do that. And there was some pushback, like, you know, had relationships with the people who fund these kind of things. And I remember taking a reverend who I won't refer to right now to a meeting because he owned some land and he wanted to build affordable housing. So I took him to a key funder. And so they listened, and afterwards they called me, Estela, why don't you do the development? I said, because we're trying to create capacity in other communities. And so we got to figure out something, for them. And I would say that if we don't have communities of color develop the capacity to build affordable housing, because it's such a great need,
yes,
that again, communities of color are going to be left behind.
Yes.
Because it is at that time I was saying it was $1 billion industry, and it's more than that today. So today we have, Chief Seattle Club, Africa Town, Reverend Jeffrey, and others, in the Latino community looking at developing housing, developing community centers, because it's important in this day and age to build assets, for our communities, because then we become stronger.
Yes. When Nipsey Hussle got killed in South Central in a public memorial, Jay-Z showed up, and in a free flow he started off by saying, gentrify your own hood before these other people do it.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what are the salient issues that are percolating in the Latino communities, both globally and locally today? I know there's a big nexus between the things that ail your community, ail our African American community, because we're kind of interlocked in many ways. But what would you say are the top 5 issues that really resonate in the Latino community?
Yeah, the top issues, one is going to be the economy. People want to make sure when you've got, immigrants from coming all over the country, not all over the country, but all over from the world, they want to come and have a better life in here. So they are concerned about the economy. They're concerned about healthcare. They're concerned about, in terms of, these are priorities that have been identified: the economy, healthcare, gun control, safety, immigration, obviously, for DACA students. And I think we all know that the immigration system is broken and it needs to be changed. And, I have to talk about this because right now, I think that the conservative element in our country has created fear about undocumented, about immigrants. And what's so ironic about all of that is that there was a study done by UCLA just a couple of years ago, and the purchasing power of Latinos in this country is $3.2 trillion. Trillion dollars. And so $3.2 trillion is bigger than the economy of France, of India, of the United Kingdom. And so if you took those resources and you created a country out of that, we would be the 5th largest country in the world.
Yes.
And so here you have the conservatives saying that our people, are rapists, they're lazy, they're taking jobs away from, others. And the jobs that our people are doing, the reality is that the vast majority of American people won't do the work. It's the agricultural industry, it's working in the restaurants and the kitchen and doing, the hard work. And there's many examples of that. And so it's irritating, frustrating that the conservative elements keep saying that. And it's because our people, we're being successful. Our people are trying to live the American dream. And, and the information that's out there, who believes in the American dream are Latinos, because they've come here to make a living. I know an indigenous man who only spoke his language when he got here. He couldn't speak Spanish, so we had the hardest time trying to talk to him. And that man has built a thriving landscaping business. And he's got like 65, and this is a lot, 65 clients a week that he's doing their landscaping work. And this was a man who didn't even know how to speak Spanish. He only spoke his indigenous language. So I love to tell his story just in terms of the determination. He worked for somebody for a long time, learned the trade, and then he said, I'm going to go out on my own. And the other thing that I have to say, because the criticism is out there, and it's happening right now with the conservative elements, that the government is utilizing the dollars to provide services and this and that. And when you think about the taxes that the undocumented or Latinos pay, our people, in particular to Social Security and Medicare, as an example, for Social Security on a yearly basis, our people contribute $25.7 billion that they will never use. It's holding up the Social Security system. And for Medicare, $6 billion a year that they will never use. And so young people, about 75% of millennials in our country, support and value and know that immigrants bring value to the country, whereas the, what are they called? The baby boomers?
Yes.
The baby boomers don't support that. But yet, why do they have Social Security, and how are we going to bolster? It's all those undocumented immigrants that will never use those dollars that is holding up this Social Security system.
The same could be said of the Haitian communities that are being targeted and scapegoated by the same Republican Party, the same former president and his attack dog with him, J.D. Vance, and so forth. Cornel West once said that the definition of conservatism is the protection of past privilege.
Yes.
Blacks and browns didn't have privilege in the past. We don't have it today. And so those who, Richard Hofstadter, who was one of the greatest social scientists of the latter half of the 20th century, says you don't have right-wing radicalism unless you have economic insecurity and status ambiguity for the historically privileged group. Economic insecurity and status ambiguity for the historically privileged group. Who is the historically privileged group? White men.
Yes.
And many of them in blue-collar towns, post-industrialism, never changed their skill set, don't have a footprint in the digital economy. And with the demographic shift, 1968, you talked about where the kids walked out of Franklin and so forth. African Americans were the top minority in terms of numbers at 12%. And today, Latino Americans are the #1 minority at creeping up on 20%. We're still at around 12.5% to 13%. But collectively, we're getting ready in about 7 years or so to become the new majority in terms of add up all the minorities. And so you have this panic, this hissy fit going on. It's under the immigration issue, it's under criminal justice, it's under affirmative action, it's under how they look at the Supreme Court, redistricting. All this is how do you maintain privilege, political dominance? How do you put in place a legal and political infrastructure for minority rule when those who have had historic privilege are now no longer the numerical majority? That's what's underneath all these issues, and that's really what's the wind at the back of the Trump candidacy. Making America great again really is code.
Right.
For making America white supremacist again.
Exactly.
So my next question then is, how does the Latino community look at this election? Because I know I get much heartburn when I see Donald Trump attempting to make gains in the black community. And any African American that supports Donald Trump clearly has been duped into wanting to vote against their own enlightened self-interest. Because there's nothing about Donald Trump's agenda that aids and abets the advancement of African-American people writ large, the same with Hispanic Americans. So tell me, how does the Latino community look at this upcoming election, and how do they see their needs as it relates to that?
Yeah. I mean, it's a complicated question, in terms...
I try to ask complicated questions.
In terms of, how Latinos, Hispanics see this issue. And that is what is driving the right wing, like you're saying, is driving them because they're afraid that they're not going to be the majority. And it's in the cards. That's what's going to happen.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's why, they don't want us to be educated. They don't want us to grow and be successful. Send them back, send them back. And I have to tell you, too, when... and just taking the Latino experience, because I think it's important for people to know this, almost 2 million people of Mexican descent were sent back in the 30s. And of those 2 million, 60% of them were citizens. And they didn't care. They just took you.
They just rounded them up.
They just rounded them up, and you didn't have documentation on you. They took you, kind of thing. In the 50s, with Eisenhower, they also sent back 1.2 million people. And there were citizens there also. So when our conservative candidate, Trump talks about sending our people back, and he has alluded to that.
A mass deportation.
Well, he's saying mass deportation, but he's also saying some of you may be citizens in that.
Yeah.
And so the same thing that they did in the 30s and the same thing that they did in the 50s, that's what they're planning for. And they want to get us out because they want this to be basically a white country. And all these people, so I'm leading up to, like, why are Latinos, some Latinos, why, I'm not sure that I can say for blacks, but for Latinos, people are fearful, of being deported. And so they think if they support Trump and that agenda, that's not going to happen to them.
If they support Trump?
Yes. They think that, they're aspiring and supporting, because there is...
So if they play nice with Trump, he'll be nice with them.
That's what they think. But that is not going to be the case. I mean, he's in Latino communities, he's in African American communities, because he's just trying to get votes. And he said it out loud to people.
Have you ever talked to somebody who went in the jungle and tried to pet a lion?
No.
They're missing an arm.
Yeah, exactly. And so the example that I give is that Trump had a housekeeper for I don't know how long who was undocumented and working for him.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you remember seeing that.
Yeah.
She went on, in a news conference. They had her up there saying he was such a great guy and this and that. They deported that woman right away. It did not matter that she had been with him for how long. So the complication, I think, is for some Latinos, they think in the economy is a priority. Uh-huh. So that means, maybe not as much taxes and also a better business climate. But again, the work that we do in terms of knowing these kind of things, Reverend, it takes work. You got to listen to the news. You got to, read other sources. Mm-hmm. And a lot of our people don't have time to do that. And they're either not listening, or maybe they're listening to Fox News. That is, in fact, I was listening to something today that Fox News is going to start having, I don't know how often, if it's like a weekly segment in Spanish, because they're going after Latinos in whatever way they can.
And studies have shown that the Fox News crowd is the most misinformed segment of the American population. You mentioned it earlier, you alluded to something that the American Labor Department has said that without the Latino workforce in the United States, 4 of the 8 major industries that prop up our economy would collapse. Agriculture, home construction, domestic services, and fast food industry will absolutely collapse.
It will.
And then when you look at what they pay in taxes, states like, if you look at per state in the United States, which states, after people have paid their federal income tax, receive back in federal monies more than what their citizens pay in.
Right.
All 12 of the former Confederate states receive back more than what their citizens pay in, and the states with the highest amount of minorities, New York, California, Pennsylvania, on and on, Michigan, we get less back than what we pay in. So we are literally keeping Kentucky and Mitch McConnell going, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Tennessee, all the places that are lying and saying we're eating dogs and bringing murderers and rapists, and yet we're keeping their roads built. We're keeping their lights on. We're keeping their broadbands being laid. We're keeping their social services going. We're literally feeding the white folks that are putting a bullseye on our back.
Absolutely. And I think, the vast majority of the American people know that. There's some number like, 77% in particular with Latinos know the value of what Latinos bring to this country in terms of hard work and creativity and creating jobs. But there is a mismatch in terms of who's in charge in making those decisions, and those who say, yes, there's value in immigrants, there's value in people of color in terms of the work that is done. And so we have to work hard to change.
Yes.
Change that.
Kevin, you had some questions for us?
Yeah, actually, you guys were doing well. I think you covered a couple of those, but one of those was, again, why do you think some Latinos are defecting to the Republican Party? What is attracting them? Is it running to the Republican Party or running away from the Democratic Party? And what are the issues that are driving them?
Let me reshape that question in a kind of way. One of the things we've noticed in the African-American community, there's a generational divide. Our older African-American people tend to be more politically tuned in, have a broader, longer perspective on these issues, tend to vote one way, and then some of our younger people, those are kind of not halfway paying attention, and are voting another sort of way, but their political opinion and attitude is ill-informed, misinformed, uninformed. Are you seeing that kind of dynamic in, generationally speaking, because 70% of the people aging in to the electorate are black, brown, red, and yellow, 70%. So young people are changing the shape of the electorate. So it's very critical that those young people really be informed.
Absolutely.
Of what these parties represent in terms of policies and the impacts of those policies on their lives. Our young Hispanic new voters and recent voters, how well informed are they, in your opinion?
Well, I think it depends on the part of the country that they're in. If you think about, the Southwest, and you hear about, I saw one, I couldn't believe it. I saw one Mexican man who could hardly speak English, speaking like with a real, he just couldn't speak English well, but yet he was saying, vote for Trump. And again, I think that people, and this is where they think that, I think the way the media projects, like right now, the media projects that Kamala and Trump, that they're sort of neck and neck. But yet, you see through TikTok or social media that's not the story that's being told. And so young people see that, and they've known Trump forever, in terms of the that TV show that he had, around business. I can't think of the name of it, but he's been out there. And so they think that Trump is a businessman, that he's made billions of dollars, and nobody can verify that because he doesn't let anyone see his income tax. And so, you know, kids look at that. I mean, I know somebody very close to me the other day, we were talking about smoking and drinking. And I said, well, you know, you probably shouldn't do that. He said, oh, no. And somehow it got to Trump. He said, well, Trump has never smoked and drank. And so for that person, that young person, that was a positive attribute that he saw in Trump and he thought he knew that Trump is a billionaire. So, you know, these things come out in different ways, and the kids hear it in snippets. And, you know, like I said earlier, it takes work to be informed.
Yes.
You know, and so we've got to look for every opportunity.
Even though they have that device, that cell phone, they have access to more information. They're getting flooded with a lot of unfiltered information where the accuracy and inaccuracy is so prominent in that. And but Kevin, you got another question for us?
Yeah, the next question is, we always hear about voter suppression and how it affects the Black community. How is voter suppression actually affecting the Latino community?
Good question.
I mean, to me, I think it's, I mean, if I look at Washington State, you know, we're a progressive state, and you know, I mean, and we're in Western Washington. We're not in Eastern Washington, where there's probably more voter suppression. And it's just we've got to do the work, and at this time in our nation, we've got 25 days or so, you know, for the election, and so I feel like Washington State is better than a lot of places. Again, you know, what are the swing states? You know, the Latinos that are in those states, is somebody
Michigan,
there,
Pennsylvania,
working
Wisconsin,
them and raising the consciousness. So it's about community organizing, because the right wing is using every single method. And I think about, like, why does Trump lie so much? And why does Vance lie so much? And they all kind of lie.
Well, the truth is not on their side.
Well, I think it's because they know whoever is listening at that moment may believe them in that moment and going to pick up votes that way. So they continue to lie. Nobody's fact checking them. And so, in fact, you know, Trump won't go on a TV program if he's going to be fact checked, you know, kind of thing.
Clearly there is some belief at some level that they can benefit from these lies, at least in a short enough term, to get into the White House.
Exactly.
And Trump has shown us there's no shame for him in being found to be a liar. He plays a sum zero political game. It's about winning, and if I win this way, so what? And but you have another question?
I do, but you guys are talking about this. I know you heard about the fact that they said the Democrats created some lasers to be able to shoot up in the clouds to cause these storms in Florida, so the Floridians couldn't vote. So anyway, I'm sorry. I had to
There was a movie in 2017, I think it was, called Geostorm.
Yes.
I think people have been going to the movies too much.
Well, yeah, Marjorie, what's her name?
Marjorie Taylor Greene.
She was the one that, and today I think she backtracked on it, you know, in the news. But it's just like, and people, you know, you're going to have some people who are going to believe those theories.
Yeah.
And maybe you pick up, you know, 100 votes from that kind of thing, you know, kind of. So.
All right, so this is the last question. I'm sorry about that. Can Kamala Harris win over disenchanted Latin voters, and what does she have to do?
Ooh. Well, I do think that she has been, you know, just in terms of what I've seen in the news and the things that I read, is that she is resonating with Latinos, and especially around, you know, the plan for immigration reform, the jobs. And again, the top priority for Latinos is not immigration reform. It is the economy. It is jobs, it's businesses, it's home ownership, as an example. And so some of those things that she's creating a plan for, Latinos are gonna want to get in and do that. So she is speaking to them also in that way.
I wonder how much of the resistance that Kamala is getting among African American men and Latino men is coming down to not just race but gender. When I see that some of the groups among minorities where she's doing better than Trump but not as well as Biden did, and say, well, what was more appealing about an older white man and an aging, declining white man than a black and Asian woman in her prime who obviously who deconstructed the other party's old white man like a block of Legos on TV. And I was talking with a young male member of my family who tends to be one of these uninformed, ill-informed, misinformed young people. And he says, well, Uncle Leslie, and this was just this week. And he said, well, Uncle Leslie, can you just imagine her foreign leaders shaking her hand, somewhere where they're shaking her hand and she's representing us. And I said, yeah, I can imagine. I said, what I can't imagine is them shaking the hand of a rapist, convicted on 34 counts, twice impeached, 91 times indicted, who led an insurrection against the government he sworn an oath to protect from all enemies, foreign and domestic, who couldn't get any more money borrowed from a U.S. bank and went and borrowed money from oligarchs in an unregulated Russian financial system that we don't know who he owes, and therefore a national security threat. That's what I can't imagine, him shaking hands with another foreign leader on our behalf. I said, are you saying to me that at the end of the day, your problem is that you can't see a woman leader? So I asked him, I said, do you know who Angela Merkel was? He said, no. Do you know who Margaret Thatcher was? He said, no. Do you know what Indira Gandhi was? He said, no. I said, your problem is you think there's something novel about a female president, prime minister, or head of state. United States, like in so many things today, we are so far behind the West, the rest of the developed world. A whole slew of nations have been led by women who led the nations forward. And we're still back in the medieval ages. I said, that was a very Hamas type, MAGA type mentality, Taliban type mentality, to suggest that in your mind, you can't see a woman leader. And I asked him, I said, when did you start hating women? And he just looked at me. Now, this is the way I talk to my ignorant family members. This is an ignorant member of my family this week who said his problem with Kamala is that she wears a skirt. To what degree is some of the pushback on Kamala, who, despite the fact that so many of the first world nations have been led by women, that we in the United States, who consider ourselves the indispensable nation, that there's a good swatch of our country that just have a problem with seeing a woman leader? Is that a real part of this?
I think there's a lot of that, from them being sexist. I mean, Mexico just voted in a woman president.
Yeah.
I mean, next door neighbors, kind of thing. And supposedly Mexico is an undeveloped country.
Which means our consciousness is behind Mexico's. Maybe they need to build a wall to keep us out.
Well, there's been some stuff out on TikTok about that. Like people are saying, if Kamala wins, I'm going to Mexico. It's like, wait a minute, do we want you there? No, kind of thing. But I think it's just a combination of things. I mean, you have people, if you look at Latinos and, that we are cultural, there's a lot of family values, very religious, Catholics, and so, they're going to care about issues like abortion. They're going to care about and not like it issues around same-sex marriage. And so there's a lot of different things that he throws out there that relate to people. And they're not things that are going to strengthen them.
Yes.
Like Kamala's agenda around the economy and jobs and home ownership and on and on.
Yes.
The latest thing, obviously, that I think is a great thing, that people who are elderly, instead of going into a nursing home, they can stay in their homes.
Absolutely.
That one is that should resonate with seniors, and I
most
hope that it does.
people want to stay in their homes.
Yes,
if
exactly.
possible. Yes. Final words to the audience out there as our time is winding up. Final words, tidbits of wisdom, something to put on people's minds as you are one of the iconic points of light in our community.
You know, like I said in my comments a couple of weeks ago, at this point, we need, if you just ask one person a day, are you registered to vote? Let me tell you how to do that. Just one. Just one person. It's going to help. And I mean, what I invite people is to come to visit El Centro, get to know us. Roberto would always say, to know us is to love us. And I think one thing that's important that the African American community in particular understand about Mexicans, Latinos, that in 1837, Mexico outlawed slavery. Want people to know that in terms of, because I know that you know, we all fall into certain things at times. And I know that people, a lot of our people think that Mexicans are taking the jobs away from them. I mean, I've been in those discussions. And this is just a little bit of tidbit information that when we think about the Underground Railroad from Texas took people, African Americans, Black people, to Mexico to live there. And that's why we have a large Afro-Latino population in Mexico and other parts of Latin America, Central America. So Black people and Latinos, we really are one people.
Yes. This has been a great, great, great conversation. I'm going to put in dibs now to have you back so that we can continue this conversation. We've got to build strong coalitions.
We do.
A rising tide lifts all boats. Ladies and gentlemen, out there in the digital sphere, I know you are, you share with me an appreciation for having here from El Centro de la Raza.
Perfect.
Get my
got
Spanish on today. Estela Ortega, we so thank you for coming on today. If you are not registered to vote, vote. Vote like your life depends on it, because it does. And so tune in next week, same bat time, same bat channel. We're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, because right here at New Beginnings Christian Fellowship, we are about to begin an artificial intelligence training program that leads to very lucrative, even six-figure paying jobs for persons out there who want a career change or want a career start. And so join us next week. Artificial intelligence and pathways to employment in the industry. It's out of the box. There's upsides, there's downsides, but there's no denying that it is shaping and reshaping our world. In the meantime, take care of your health, take care of your wealth, and in the words of Don Cornelius, peace and love.
Thank you for joining Conversations with the Pastor here every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Make sure you join us next week. And you can also join us for worship service on Sundays at 9:30 a.m. See you next week.